My second birth story, the birth of Daphney, began as soon as Nemo came into the world. Although his first birth was rewarding and made me feel very strong and capable as a mother, there was something lacking. Some say that if you end up with a healthy baby, the rest doesn't matter, but many others like myself will argue that birth does matter, and so with the disappointment of having to transfer to the hospital the first time, shortly after Nemo's birth I set out to prepare a gentler way for my second child to be born. I conceived soon after Nemo's first birthday, and although we weren't exactly planning that to happen, Glenn and I were both very excited, and just like the first time, we giddily called our parents when the pregnancy test read positive. I was due on August 12, 2008, and this time my home birth midwife was the supervisor of my first home birth midwife. She was excellent and gave me just what I needed to know that I could give birth at home, and I could be healthy all the way through. Around 6.5 weeks, though, I started bleeding a lot, and I thought I was losing my new baby. But when it stopped and I had another positive pregnancy test, I held my breath, only to start bleeding again. This happened several times over the course of 2 weeks, and I came very close to using herbs to finish the job, convinced that no baby could survive the bleeding I had had. So Glenn and I prayed, and I cried, and then we waited. And we waited, and waited some more. After a long week of no bleeding, I heard the placenta through my Doppler, and finally, with joy, we knew what to pray for. 2 weeks after that, we heard our precious baby's heartbeat, and finally I felt safe to attach myself to our baby. The rest of my pregnancy went very well, and I actually felt healthier this time around. The 35th week came and went, and praise God, my blood pressure remained normal. The day I began having contractions, I was 39 weeks and 3 days along. I had just spent the afternoon tearing apart my house with my mom doing some much-needed spring cleaning, when shortly after she left I realized I was having contractions consistently 5 to 7 minutes apart. I hoped this baby would come much faster, like in 24 hours, but it turns out that I'm the slow and steady type, at least until the end anyway. 2 days later I was getting a little antsy. The contractions were still coming, anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes apart, sometimes stopping for an hour or two. And every night I slept well only to wake up to more contractions. So on the second day, I bought a 1,000-piece puzzle to keep my mind busy, and when I wasn't busy with Nemo or chores, I was working on that puzzle. On the 8th day, a friend came to visit, and upon seeing my labor project, she told me about a friend who also started a puzzle for her labor project, and when she put in the last piece, her water broke, and I secretly wished that would happen to me, but it didn't. I finished it on day 10, and nothing happened. Still the same old lazy contractions, one after another. I tried not to think about what people were thinking, and I mostly stayed home, slightly embarrassed that I was taking so long and silently questioning if I was making it all up. But on that 10th day, at 40 weeks and 6 days, my midwife and I decided on a plan. Over the next 3 days, I took several large doses of black and blue cohosh, had my membrane stripped, I was at 4 centimeters on day 11, and on day 13, at 41 weeks and 2 days, I woke myself up at 4 in the morning to do the most dreadful of all things, and I swear I will never do this again. I almost cried as I sat at the table looking at the drink I had prepared for myself. A 1/4 cup of OJ, a 1/4 cup of vodka, and a 1/4 cup of castor oil. Although the vodka did help to break up the oil, I did not go back to sleep very quickly, and I did not wake up in labor. Unlike the first time where it actually caused me to have contractions, this time I woke up to severe diarrhea, followed by vomiting. I was not expecting that I'd be camping out on a sleeping bag by the bathroom door, and no way was I letting Glenn go to work that day, leaving me with a 22-month-old while I sat on the toilet all morning. So he took Nemo for a drive, and my mom came to stay with me. By 10 a.m. I was feeling much better, and after taking a shower I lay down to take a nap. I was a bit tired because Nemo hadn't slept well the night before due to teething, and then of course I was up early, but I was unable to fall asleep. Glenn and Nemo came home, I got up feeling much better, and my mom went to visit her mom up the road. Now the pressure was really on. At that point I was closer to 5 centimeters, and the baby's head, which had been sideways in my pelvis, was now turned in the right direction and had dropped more, but I was still not having very good contractions. So I took a walk around the block, found a dead cat that I thought belonged to my neighbor but didn't, and tried biking on my stationary bike for a couple minutes, causing some good contractions. At about this point, 3:45 p.m., Glenn called his mom to pray, and we should have expected what came next, because when this woman prays, she means business, and things start happening. 15 minutes later, I was breathing through contractions, and I couldn't walk through them anymore. Still not convinced it was the real thing, we decided to walk to the end of the street before calling our midwife, who lived 1.5 hours away. You can see the end of our road from our house, but because the contractions were coming on top of each other and each one made me want to get down on my hands and knees, it wasn't until 5 p.m. that I called my midwife and my mom came back to the house. Glenn called his mom, and she said she'd been praying for hard, fast labor and for the baby to come by nightfall, and I'm thinking, geesh, thanks, but you didn't have to pray that hard. I knew this labor was going much faster than my first. Instead of saying, oh baby, like the first time, I could only moan through the contractions. For a short while I was on hands and knees resting on the ball, but Daphney kept kicking me during the contractions, which hurt more than the contraction itself, so I laid down to try to get more comfortable. And I stayed lying on my side until the midwife got there because I was afraid she wouldn't make it in time. My mom did great with Nemo, who carried on with life as if nothing unusual was happening. She taught him to sing the Here Comes the Baby song with me so I wouldn't make him nervous, and then they went outside to pick wildflowers, which are now dried hanging on our dining room wall. Meanwhile, Glenn was trying very hard to fill the birth pool with hot water as I wanted very much to have a water birth. But when the midwife and her assistant, Nemo's midwife, got there, it was still only lukewarm, so I scratched that idea. I remember that around 6:15 or so I started feeling a lot of pressure from the baby's head, and I imagined that I would soon be feeling the urge to push. My mom was pulling out supplies, trying to hurry the midwife who was driving over the speed limit the whole way, and I could tell by the tone of her voice that she was getting anxious about the possibility that we would be doing this without the midwife. Around 6:45 p.m., both midwives arrived and found that I was still only 8 centimeters dilated, not quite ready to push. I was tired, and yet I felt very determined, and I told myself not to be discouraged because 8 centimeters was really good and I could do this. We were trying to figure out the best position I should be in, but the midwife recommended that I first empty my bladder. I thought sitting on the toilet would hurt more, but I found that my hips felt a lot better when I was sitting rather than lying down. But very soon after, still sitting on the toilet, I started getting that grunty feeling, and the midwife said I only had a lip of cervix left, but with the next contraction I was able to push. This pushing phase was much different than Nemo's, partly because I didn't have any drugs, and partly because it was happening a lot faster, and was therefore much more intense. I was sitting there on the toilet with my right leg going numb, leaning over the diaper pail with my mom on the other side encouraging me. Glenn was videotaping and keeping an eye on Nemo, who was playing with some new toys. I clearly remember feeling Daphney's head like a big ball sitting inside my pelvis, and although I knew the science, I could not comprehend how my body was going to let her out, so I didn't think about that anymore. But my nerves were going crazy, and my fingers were twitching, and I was trying not to be overcome by the amazing power enveloping my whole body. The contractions didn't hurt anymore. And then, "It's burning!" and the midwife came running in. She cupped the top of Daphney's head in her hand, asked me if I wanted to do this right there, and I said yes, thinking it's a little too late to be asking me that. 1 or 2 pushes more and her head was out, and I stood up with my mom holding my weight while my midwife suctioned Daphney's nose and mouth to make sure she hadn't swallowed any of the meconium that came out with her. "I'm not getting anything," she said, and with the next push my baby girl came flying out at 7:30 p.m. on August 21st, 2008, all 8 pounds 8 ounces and 20 inches of her. I sat back down, pulled Daphney in my arms, and with a catch in my throat I discovered and announced that we had a baby girl. There were 7 of us in our tiny bathroom, including Daphney and Nemo, who watched the whole thing. Before the placenta was delivered, I carried my baby back to my sleeping bag in the dining room, and by 9 p.m. I was bundled up with her in our blow-up bed downstairs, and the first guests were coming to meet the new arrival. Nearly 2 weeks of contractions, and I didn't even miss a night's sleep. And the strange thing is, looking back, that after all the excitement about planning a home birth, once she was born at home it didn't really feel like a big deal. And maybe that was because I didn't rush to the hospital, or because life was carrying on around me as I labored. I'll never know. But in the end, I do feel I have put closure to my questions about Nemo's birth, and I'm very proud of myself about Daphney's birth. But you know me, I'm not done yet, or at least I hope not. I've already begun my 3rd child's journal in hopes I'll be doing this again in a couple years.